Good evening, everyone. I'm David Johnson of Transform Ed Consulting, and I would be remiss if I did not do a shout out for my dear friend and colleague, Cassandra Williams, who is the brains behind Educational Innovation 360 Degrees. She kindly allows us to use her channel, whether it's YouTube or Facebook. We are here by courtesy of Cassandra Williams. Our guest tonight is Tim Jansa. Tim, tell us about yourself. Where are you in the world?
I am in Atlanta, Georgia, David. I'm really happy to be here with you. Thank you for the opportunity and for inviting me. Um, I am a higher education consultant, mentor, coach, and what I love doing and what drives me is just to improve the working experience of those working hard in a wonderful and important field, which is higher education, especially on the administrative side. So I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'll read your bio, your official bio in brief. Tim Jansa, EDD, is a consultant, coach, facilitator, mentor, and leader with over 2 decades experience serving higher education and the nonprofit sector and helping multinational corporations tackle intercultural communications challenges. In addition to serving 14 years in the university system of Georgia and in private institutions, he built internationally recognized expertise through his research and thought leadership on higher education, as well as organizational development, communication, and culture. Dr. Jansa studied higher education leadership at Georgia State University. He is a board certified coach, holds ICF professional certified coaching certification, and is a certified agile coach and agile team facilitator. You have an impressive background, and you might explain to our audience how it is that you're Tim Jansa and not Tim Jansa.
The bio makes me look real good, so I'm very happy about that. Now, the reason I pronounce it Jansa because it's actually Czech. I was born and raised in Germany, and I came to the United States 20, well, and I have to think, 8 years ago as an international student, where I went to the University of Wyoming in Laramie. It was a wonderful experience for 2 years to get my master's, and then I got stuck and ended up in Atlanta, where I've been living since 1998. And so
Well,
this
you
is the
know, that
reason why my name is
highlights,
pronounced.
I'm sorry, that highlights some of the aspects of your biography and your professional career. I'll read a few things here. Internationally recognized expertise. What does that mean in regards to your background growing up in Germany and immigrating, or now you have two passports, I understand?
I do, yes. I'm actually very lucky to be a U.S. citizen and still an EU, a German citizen, which makes traveling really easy. I just got back from Germany, and it's wonderful to both walk through the immigration line at a Frankfurt airport as well as at JFK and just be through in just a couple of minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as internationally recognized expertise is concerned, well, again, I have an international background. I did a lot of research, publication in international higher education. So I've published some papers, white papers, some peer-reviewed articles. And I am also serving as an affiliate for an organization that helps colleges and universities with their international programs. So that's the international side. In terms of internationally recognized, I guess when I look at my proverbial Rolodex, since none of us have Rolodexes anymore, I guess there's a lot of folks, but a lot of professionals, academics, non-academics in the agile community, higher ed community across the world that I work with. And some of my publications have also appeared in some international journals. So very happy that it's worked out this way so far.
Now, Tim, I didn't mention it earlier, but I lived in Germany, and I have a very close relationship with Germany. I call them my Deutsche Familie in Germany, and I visit regularly. And when I go to Germany, I'm not going as a tourist. I'm going as a visitor to see my friends and see places where I've lived and see how things have changed. But I know that the higher education system in Europe and the system in the United States differ. So how is it that you're able to serve both cultures and accomplish the needs from both?
Well, they differ, but in many ways they don't, which is kind of strange. And it seems like a contradiction. So the reason I'm kind of at home, of course, I'm at home more in the US system because I've spent more time here. But I did go to university in Germany. I completed what was the equivalent of a bachelor's degree. back in 1996, and then came to the U.S. In 1998 to get my master's over here. But what I found really interesting, and this isn't just for Germany, this is for the UK, it is for some systems in Asia even, um, to some extent at least, is that a lot of the issues, a lot of the challenges that people working at these institutions face are pretty universal. That can certainly be said for a North American university. I have a larger network of people from Stanford to MIT to UCLA to some smaller colleges. And much of what they tell me very much resonates with me, even though my experience has been primarily in the university system of Georgia and Georgia State University. So therefore, I think I'm pretty well positioned, let's say it this way, to
Mhm.
have these conversations with professionals around the world.
Well, I would imagine, I know that you are bilingual. I would imagine that that has added to your strength as a consultant regarding communications.
It certainly has, and that's actually very, very good observation and comment. Um, I spent several years of my life teaching the German language and intercultural relations, especially as it pertains to Germany. And one of the things that I have found is that you cannot separate language from culture. You cannot separate speaking a language of also thinking as a native speaker or as a speaker of that language. And the same is true when I look at colleges and universities, for example. Anybody familiar with them will know that there are lots of cultures and subcultures, lots of disciplinary and functional silos. And one of the skills that I developed early is to navigate very quickly between these individual cultures and units, and actually also understand where the people are coming from and what they're saying and why they think and behave to some extent the way they do.
Yeah. Well, some people would call that cultural competence. And of course, one of the challenges for anyone who is multicultural is to be able to, what is it, code switch, to be able to code
Yep.
switch when you go from one culture to another
Hmm.
culture. Oh, impressive, impressive. Well, sir, our topic tonight is back to basics, making higher education administration work for everyone. And then you've put together somewhat of an organizational chart here for us, an agile framework for transforming higher education with three subsets: staying people positive, shifting to servant leadership, tackling organizational debt. Where would you like to start?
Well, maybe I should very generally or very very briefly talk about the origin story of this. So I've been in the coaching business for the last couple of years. Finished my training, and then last summer I was at a point where I was trying to figure out what I'm going to do with it, which direction I'm going to go, what my niche would be, and I discovered agile as a more as a philosophy and way of working and doing and thinking and running projects. And for those who are not familiar with it, really what it is, you start small, you work in short sprints, increments. You work very closely with whoever the customer is in this particular case. You're allowed to fail. You're allowed to experiment. But you need to fail fast. So that's the general idea about agile. And once I became certified in various aspects of the agile enterprise, I developed this framework that helped me kind of articulate how I see change in higher ed administration. Because one of the things that I would love the audience here to take away is there is urgency in higher ed. Many leaders, especially those who come from the academic side, may not be quite as aware as maybe as they should be that staff, I'm talking about non-academic staff here, are really having a hard time. And a lot of them are leaving. There's a lot of brain drain going on. And so what can be done about it? Because a lot of times I talk to leaders and they say, well, I don't know what we can do about it. It's such a huge problem. Well, it is. But what I want people to take away is that there is hope. There's a way of doing it. And this framework is something I developed to provide those kind of services.
All right, I have questions. You know, I have questions. Agile.
I know you do.
Yes. Would you define agile a little further, if you don't mind?
Well, as I mentioned, so agile, the idea is that you as a leader, you empower and you support small autonomous teams of experts. That is easily said than done, especially in higher education, because expertise a lot of times for anybody is vested in your position or in your title, and not necessarily in your experience and how you truly understand the system you're working within. So the idea is for leaders to say, you know what, I don't have all the answers, but I have people, maybe in the departments, maybe on the front lines, at the very bottom of the organizational chart, who actually do have the answers. So the idea is to assemble teams that are cross-functional, that are not siloed, that have the expertise, and then you support them in coming up with the solutions in small increments, and you also implement in small increments.
I wondered whether you would say cross something. You said cross functional, and when you described the organization chart, I wondered if you would say cross organizational level. If we're talking about the whole range of the organization chart within an institution of higher education, cross functional. Okay, cool. I get it. All right. Um, when I was launching my business, Transformative Consulting, a lot of people say, "Well, you want to do an agile business plan." Have you heard that term before? And what would that be, and how would it differ or be similar to the way you've described agile framework for higher education?
I have heard this. And one of the issues with Agile is that over the past 23 years, since the Agile Manifesto was published in 2001, the Agile community has not only split to some extent, but also there are so many misconceptions about what Agile is. People think we do Agile. You don't really, I don't think you really do Agile. There's certain methodologies that are subsumed under the umbrella of Agile. I mean, everything from Kaizen as a concept, Kanban as a concept, extreme programming, because it really comes from the software development world. So, when I hear an agile business plan, I'm not really sure exactly what that means.
Hmm.
Agile to me is really a way of being, of thinking, of working. And it forefronts the idea that you put small teams, small autonomous teams of experts, that leaders assume more of a servant leadership role, and that they empower their teams to actually come up with solutions and then also introduce them. And I
Mm-hmm.
took this, a step further in my framework. So that's my concept of agile,
Okay.
um, in a nutshell.
Another question regarding our topic: an agile framework for transforming higher education. And you said this in passing, but let's talk about transforming and change.
Mhm.
There is an expression that all change is not for the better, but to get better, some things must change.
Mhm.
And then now, there's another expression that goes along with this: is the only person who likes change is a baby with a dirty diaper. So, so how do we put all of that together? Do we assume that if we're going to work in higher education or any organization, that change is necessary? If it ain't broke, you don't fix it. That's my point.
Well, I think it's easy to think that just because things have been done a certain way for the last
Okay.
several decades means that they work, and means that they ain't broke.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the challenge is sometimes, and I mentioned that earlier, is that many leaders, especially those who come from the academic world,
Mm-hmm.
um, may struggle with understanding the experience that administrative staff have in our colleges and universities, and they may not see that they are struggling, that there is a mountain of organizational debt. And I mentioned that. So organizational debt, and I need to kind of put this out there as a definition. Organizational debt, by and large, is all the processes, the workflows, the procedures, the way we're doing things that once made sense but no longer do. um, and so one of these things is people want change. That is one thing that's the common denominator. People want change. They're afraid of it, but if it's done right, change doesn't have to be scary.
Oh, tackling organizational debt. So you're not talking about financial debt. You're talking
Yep.
about, well, yeah. Would you elaborate upon that? Um, there's a term. What is it? Social. I'm not getting it. The idea is no. That's not the idea. Social currency.
Social
currency,
currency, like
and not
social, yeah,
currency
like social
meaning
capital.
yeah, coach, social capital. Yes.
Yeah.
So when you say tackling organizational debt, are you uh, saying that in general terms is related to social capital?
Not necessarily. I think these are two different things. I mean, social capital is basically the investment you make into a social relationship with the hopes that you can ultimately
Right.
withdraw that capital, right? And get
Right.
something done and be able to ask somebody for a favor or even get a
Right.
favor even if you don't ask for it. What I'm referring to with organizational debt is really things like policies or rules that were established at some point, maybe 20, 30 years ago. A tool, a technology was introduced to help with work, but has completely outlived its usefulness. I'm thinking back to my previous institution, for example, the way uh, hiring and onboarding of graduate students was done, getting them tuition waivers how their pay was set up. There were structures in place that made absolutely no sense, and everybody working with and around it and suffering under the burden of having to deal with it knew it. But there was not a whole lot of will, let's say, on the leadership side to tackle these issues and to see that there is a huge issue. The same is true, and this is where we come back to Agile. When we introduce a new tool that is a technology based tool, it is easy to think that this is a panacea. You just put it out there and everybody's going to be happy and work with it and it's going to solve all our problems. The issue is that a tool has to support the way human beings work and not the other way around. And this is also one of the foundational concepts of Agile, where any kind of tools and processes have to support the human employee. And again, not let them be ruled by the tool.
Tim, you said some good things, and I hope I can remember the topics because I have a couple or three that I'd like to dig in a little deeper. Um, Regarding making changes in procedures or policies in any institution, whether it's higher education or any other institution, isn't that a matter of priorities? Now you'll say you didn't use the word political will, but you did say will. Political will because it's going to cost you in some sort of way to do something to change things when some people will enjoy the change and others will say it's been working, it's not broken, so why do I need to change it now? And that has a certain cost to the administrator or the person who's trying to make a change there. So is it not a matter of priority?
It is a matter of priority. And I think also certain changes are simply not possible. I mean, especially when you're working, let's say, for a state institution or, for you get federal funds, you get state funds. There are certain rules and policies and procedures you simply cannot change, and that's fine. But generally, the way you actually implement and work around these rules and regulations, let's say on the front lines, right, where the rubber meets the roads, it's usually the departmental offices and your lowly departmental administrators there. There's usually ways of improving that. As far as the cost, I honestly don't think there is too much of a cost. And here's the reason why. Definitely not financial, because what it takes is a good leader to come in and actually talk to the people who know how things work or don't work, empower them, bring them into the conversation, allow them to come forth with some plans to make changes within the scope that is possible, and then implement them. What happens here is you're actually going to benefit as a leader. Your employees benefit because all of a sudden they're being called upon to do something for the greater good of the university and also to make their own lives and those of their colleagues easier. Um, so as far as cost, I really don't. I think there's actually more to be gained from it. But you're right; it has to be done right. And here's the political, to some extent, the big caveat: this requires leaders who actually are willing to let go of their ego, who have a certain level of humility, who will come in and say, you know what, I really don't know how all this works, but you guys do. So I want you to help me, help us create pathways for improvement.
Um, you might have heard this one. Decisions are best made at the level where they occur or where they would be most effective. So generally, that's what you said. That let's say you run a whole big organizational structure, and there are people on the front lines. Well, they should be making decisions and making plans for how they work rather than top down, so to speak.
Yes and no. Maybe I can push back a little bit there.
Okay.
I think the decision to support these people, the decision to engage employees in actively and help allow them to co-create change with you, that
Okay.
of course has to happen at the higher level, right? Just because, somebody in a department says, well, I want change. Well, that's great, but if they're not being heard further up, then of course that is not going to it's not going to happen. Now, the planning, the expertise, that's what I'm saying,
Hmm.
really oftentimes, not always, lies further down the organizational charge. And I think for leaders to recognize that, to make a conscious decision to let to put those people in the driver's seat, to identify a few, right?
Hmm.
I think that is very important. And one important thing about this, and I don't think I've addressed this, what I always tell people is start small, scale slowly, and let the network do the heavy lifting for you. What I mean by that, start with small innovations and see how they percolate through the system, see how they're being picked up by others, and then use that as a driver for change to reinforce a positive perception of that change. And that
Yeah.
generally, once you reach that point where it's almost like a snowball effect, it's really
Yeah.
miraculous what can happen.
Yeah. Building upon successes. Yeah. What is it that the tech industry say? Run fast and break things. Move fast, break things.
Yep.
Yeah. So you counter that thinking.
To some extent, yes,
Go ahead.
absolutely. But I still embrace the idea of, let your teams try, let your teams experiment.
Hmm.
There's somebody I always like to refer to. His name is Aaron Dignan at a consulting firm, Loretti. He wrote this book called Brave New Work. And one of the things he talks about is above the waterline and below the waterline experimentation. Imagine you're in the side, inside the hull of a ship. You can drill a hole above the waterline, experiment, and see what's going on there, and that's fine. You might get a little wet, but that's all right. But you don't want to drill below the waterline. So for a leader, leaders really have to kind of set a limit and say, okay, so within this scope, within this particular predefined scope, I want you to experiment and see what can work. And then if it doesn't work, if you fail, that's okay.
Hmm.
That's now we've learned one way of how not to do things.
Hmm. I understand. You sort of mentioned this, but it's one of our topics. So let's talk about it directly. Shifting to servant leadership. Would
Yeah,
you expand upon that?
sure. So it's ironic, I think, that in institutions of higher learning, that people always perceive are cutting edge, ahead of the game, the structures are very ossified, and also with it, certain perceptions of leadership. There is still this idea that a leader has to be the strong, top down, hard decision maker, the person who takes charge. Um, that this certainly served its purpose. You could even categorize it as organizational debt to some extent, right? And the structures are built based on these base assumptions. Um, but this has certainly shifted, especially since the pandemic, since people have been spending a lot more time working from home, hybrid arrangements, even completely remote arrangements. But this is something that's been going on for a long time, is that people want more autonomy. They want to be trusted. And the idea of a servant leader is really somebody who trusts his or her team to do the right work and do the work right, and to provide the resources and the moral and sometimes financial support to allow them to do the best work they possibly can. Again, this is something that requires you bracketing your ego to some extent, that requires a level of humility to say, I don't have all the answers, but you do. And that's the idea really behind servant leadership. And as you can see from what I described earlier, the way I really see approaching transition and change in higher ed, especially on the administrative side, this is extremely powerful, but it's something that's really doesn't come natural to many leaders in higher education.
Well, how does if it doesn't come natural, how does someone become a servant leader?
Well, I think this is where good coaching, facilitation, mentoring really comes in very handy. I believe that if you don't have at least a spark of servant leadership in you, it's probably not going to happen. If you embrace this, the strong man, and I'm deliberately saying man here, idea of leadership, it will be very difficult. But we have a lot of wonderful, burgeoning leaders who actually want to support people and see themselves in that role. For their leaders to recognize that, and then to bring people in, like myself, like other people who function as consultants and as coaches and as mentors, and really help them build on these strengths. That is the way to do it. And then have them experience the power of what it means to be a servant leader.
How do you help people stay people positive? How does one remain people positive?
That directly intersects with servant leadership. Uh, Being people positive really is the idea is you have to trust your people. You have to recognize and leverage their real expertise. You want to allow them to always grow and learn, which sometimes goes against hierarchy. Um, and again, when you're in a system that's very top down and very hierarchical, it's difficult for leaders to sometimes do that. It's a leap of faith, but ultimately, if you remain positive that your people want to do right and want to do the right thing and want to do it right and really want to be engaged in their work and in the success of your institution, of your students. And if you trust in that and give people the opportunity to really to earn that trust and to act and work accordingly, that is really how you stay people positive.
People positive. Well, Tim, we've covered a lot of topics here, and I wish we could go into as deep a depth or the depth level that would ensure we had full understanding of everything. But of course, there's only limited time. So if there were a takeaway you'd like people to have from our conversation, what would that takeaway be?
It really is something I mentioned very briefly at the beginning. There is a sense, or there needs to be a sense of urgency. A lot of focus by leaders lies on the academic side of the house. I think there is need to direct some of the attention and resources and support to the non-academic side of the house, especially at the lower levels. However, there is hope. There is a way of transforming gradually our institutions, our administrative operations, to really make them work for all employees. And that naturally is something that I do very passionately, and I'm be happy to help anybody to accomplish.
And what do you want people to do with this information? What's the call to action?
Well, the call to action, I think the first thing, visit my website. Easy to remember, leadershipimagined.com. I have, of course, there's some information about myself, but it's also a lot of information about my thinking. There's a whole series about agile transformation in higher ed administration. My framework is explained in detail on there. And then, of course, I would love for people to reach out. You can reach out via my website, which is tim@leadershipimagined.com. Or, of course, I would love to connect with the audience via LinkedIn. The link is in there. The great thing is I'm very, very easy to find because I'm the only one. And that's a big advantage of having a somewhat unusual name that's pronounced.
Well, thank you. You've been a fascinating guest, and I enjoy our conversation. I'm sure we will have further conversations in the future. Tim Jansa, EDD, is a consultant, coach, facilitator, mentor, and leader with over 2 decades experience serving higher education and the nonprofit sector. Thanks for being with us this evening, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure. That was fun.